I'm a writer, and I've been writing novels and short stories for quite a long time now. Publishing the whole trade fiction world. My most recent book is called The Mistress of Nothing, which, to my astonishment, being a kind of mid-list, for spending many years as a mid-list writer in the mid-list doldrums, so to speak, this book was rather successful. Its fate was transformed in Canada, in particular, when it won the Governor General's Award for Fiction there in 2009, and that, of course, led to other publications, other territories, translations, etc., including here. This is the U.S. edition, which Simon & Schuster published last year. But since 2002, I've also been heavily involved in creating new forms of literature, what I call, for want of a better word, digital fiction. Hybrid forms, really, that use the potential of the computer to find new ways to tell stories, that merge images, films, video, animation, and sometimes even games, to find new ways to tell stories. But with my digital fiction, text is always central, because text remains the most important way of telling stories to me as a writer. So I've been involved with lots of projects. These digital fiction projects are always collaborative. I always work with web designers and web artists. Sometimes they're networked, sometimes they are commissioned by publishers and exist on CD-ROM, but most often they're available for free online, sometimes grant funded, sometimes not. So a little sort of definition: online works, but as I said, not always online, that combine text with images, video, sound effects, music, animation, and games. So I'll talk just briefly about a couple of projects, Flight Paths being one of them, but first to mention a project that I was involved with in 2007 with Penguin UK, which was called A Million Penguins, which I worked on with my students at De Montfort University at the time. And Penguin wanted to ask the question, can a community write a novel? And so we opened a wiki called A Million Penguins, put in an opening line, and then opened it to anyone in the world who wanted to write or edit it. And it resulted, I don't know if any of you remember that project, but it resulted in a sort of a real firestorm of publicity, sort of went around the world. 80,000 people logged into it, 1,500 people wrote and edited it. And it was, the sort of task of me and my students largely was about controlling it, trying to maintain it. It was subject to a lot of extremely creative vandalism. For instance, the first day it opened, it had so much traffic, the server fell over. Penguin, to their credit, got it up and running again. But Jeremy, the Penguin editor who we were working with, Jeremy Ettenhausen, woke up in the middle of the night, that first night, and turned on his computer and went to see what was happening in A Million Penguins. And somebody had deleted the entire thing and written "fuck Penguin" in big words across the screen. But because it was a wiki, Jeremy could revert it to a previous version. And it went on. It was open for 5 weeks, and we had one very active user who used to come in and change all the nouns to the word banana repeatedly. His username was, of course, Banana Man. We had a lot of debates about whether or not to block him from the site, because we actually all were rather entertained by the Banana Man. But so a lot of what my students and I had to do was around controlling this. So when my collaborator Chris Joseph and I decided to try a different kind of collaborative writing project, which is what we wanted to do with Flight Paths, we decided to have to more rules. We didn't have a publisher involved, so it was necessarily smaller, didn't get the kind of publicity that A Million Penguins did. Flight Paths was a story that I, as a writer, had been living with for quite a long time. It came out of a newspaper article that I first came across in 2001 in The Guardian about a supermarket car park in a part of West London, quite near where I live, where over the course of a decade, a series of 4 bodies had landed in this supermarket car park. And of course, what transpired is that it's on one of the main flight paths into Heathrow, and there was this myth that had gone around the world that you could, it's still prevalent, that you can get into an airplane by climbing up through its landing gear. It's not true, and most people who try to stow away on a plane in this way don't survive. Hence these bodies landing in the car park. And it struck my sort of writer's imagination, the story of these bodies, because of the weird juxtaposition of the idea of the kind of what kind of person, what kind of circumstances would you live in where you would take that kind of risk, and indeed your body landing up in the car park of what is a very affluent part of London, very upmarket supermarket, and the kind of collision that literal collision that represents. So that was the sort of starting point for this collaborative project, and we started building it in a blog, discussing the story, discussing the issues, thinking about characters. We had about 100 people participating in the project with us at the same time. And what we ended up with was five episodes, 5 little fragments. Excuse me, multimedia fragments that you can see if you just follow the links on my own website. If you go to katepullinger.com and then digital work, you can find most of these projects. Oh, one last thing about A Million Penguins is that it no longer exists, apart from the parts of it that were archived on the Wayback Machine in the Internet Archive, so that's a good thing. Another digital fiction project of mine is Inanimate Alice, which is another ongoing project, a digital novel in episodes. For me, Inanimate Alice has been a really interesting project because when we started out, we didn't really know what we were doing or indeed what we were creating. But it's a project that has grown and grown and grown over the years. There are 4 existing episodes out of a planned 10, and it tells the story of a girl called Alice growing up surrounded by technology. She lives in a family that her father works in the oil industry, and they move all the time, so she's often homeschooled. And each episode is set in a different country. As she travels with her parents, she moves from age 8 to age 14 with the idea that later episodes she'll be older. The episodes are all in 5 languages as well. But I had a really significant experience with the evolution of Inanimate Alice when in 2009, its audience began to talk back to me, talk back to us, Chris Joseph and I and the other people who are involved in Inanimate Alice, in that I had a Google alert set up for Inanimate Alice, and I one day, looking at the alerts, found a whole swath of episode 5s of Inanimate Alice. We hadn't created an episode 5, but there they were. And just following the links, it transpired that these episodes were created by a class of teachers here in the US, actually, a teacher who told us these students had been, in her terminology, called hard to reach. They were 17-year-olds, and they'd made using PowerPoint mostly, a whole series of Alice stories. And that really was a kind of eureka moment for me, in that it made me see a new way of thinking about interactivity. What does it mean to produce a work that people then respond to, remix, rewrite, republish, etc.? And the real potential for that, for work of this nature. So this project does continue to grow, as I said. It's this year it was named as the American Association of School Libraries one of 25 best websites for teaching and learning, and Mozilla has used it as an example for their Hackosaurus Hive New York City project, and also the BBC the BBC's collaboration with Arts Council England, The Space, their new digital initiative, that they're featuring it on that as well. So that's you know, very gratifying and interesting. But as ever, I've been, you know, I've worked in these two parallel fields, trade fiction publishing, digital fiction experiments, and I've been very interested in trying to think of ways to draw the two things closer together, the two modes of writing, two modes of publishing, really. It feels sometimes like I have my feet in two separate canoes, and it's a bit difficult to keep standing. So I'm always interested in trying to find ways to draw the two things together. The market for digital fiction is an emerging market. It comes from a lot of different directions. It comes out of gaming. It comes out of experimental, innovative literature movements, and it's, you know, colliding or not, as it sometimes seems to be the case, with a traditional market, the old market, trade fiction market, which is in itself in extreme transition. And my question is always, is it possible to merge these two ways of telling stories? And that the ultimate question is, sometimes is, will my book publisher ever be interested in my digital fiction? I was on a panel a couple of years ago at TOC Frankfurt, which Kat invited me to do, where we were talking about research and development in trade fiction publishing. And one of my fellow panelists was Richard Nash, who's not present, but whose name has been mentioned many times in the last couple of days. And after the panel, in private, Richard took me aside and said, "Oh, give up. They'll never be interested in what you're doing. You've got to keep doing these two things separately. The two things, they just won't work together." But despite Richard's pessimism, I've persisted in trying to think about creating projects that merge these two fields. And indeed, under the influence of Henry Jenkins and Hugh McGuire, if Hugh is around today, I've been interested in trying to think about spreadable media. This is Jenkins' concept, you know, in opposition to the notion of viral media, which he calls the smallpox blanket theory of media, as opposed to spreadable media, which is with its connotations of butter and jam. I've been trying to think about books as spreadable media. I've been interested in thinking about how my digital fiction projects have succeeded, at least in part, because they are spreadable, because they exist online, because they can be remixed, refashioned, revisited easily. And I've been thinking about how to try to make my books more spreadable. And my reference to Hugh is to do with Hugh's notion that one of the puzzling things about current ebooks is that they are created using web technology, while at the same time ignoring what is best about the web, the connectivity, the way you can go from a book out, the way you can't go from an ebook out into the world. And when I think about I think about a project like Inanimate Alice versus a project like my novel, The Mistress of Nothing, it becomes very clear to me, the sort of dichotomy there, that even though The Mistress of Nothing did well as a novel, won a prize, etc., did well, there is still I have a very strong sense in that it's contained in its silo, and as a project, as a book, it's over. To kind of try to promote or discuss a book that was published in 2009, a novel published in 2009, just seems kind of weird. That's the past. It exists. It's in its silo. And I'm interested to try to think how you can break books like that out of these silos and give them a kind of life like my digital fiction works do have online. What would it take to allow a book to engage its audience in a way that the audience begins to talk back like they do with Inanimate Alice, and for a book to be enhanced and augmented in the way that Inanimate Alice has been through its readership? So this is my newest project, which is the thing where I am trying to bring these two worlds together. It comes out of the story behind Flight Paths. So Flight Paths exists already online as a project. It has a novel at its heart as well, which is called Landing Gear. And then it has a digital fiction epilogue, which is called Jewel, which I'm going to try to show you a little bit of if I have time. This is a screenshot of a website that I've created, which I've created to try to help publishers understand my project. It seems a kind of a weird thing for a writer to create a website to help publishers understand what she's trying to do, but it was. We'll see. The project's just gone out. The novel is ready. The project's just. My agent has just started sending it out in this week actually. So we'll see. I suppose one question really is, why am I interested in trying to find a trade publisher who will work on this kind of experiment with me? And I think the simplest answer really is that I still think that trade fiction publishing has a lot to offer to a writer in terms of editorial, in terms of thinking about market, in terms of shaping and guiding a project overall. It would be very straightforward to me to self-publish this project and all its elements. But I'm going to try to see if I can do it through a mainstream publisher first. So I'm going to see if I can show you a little bit of this prototype. Whoop, didn't work. I've tried to show this prototype a few times and it has never worked. But I'm sure that Samuel will help me make it work. Oh, I forgot about that. It's in slide 10 if you need to find where it is. Thank you. So this tells a bit of the story about one of the main characters, Harriet, and her teenage son, Jack. It's just a little part of the overall story. This is a prototype. It works on all devices. This is a desktop prototype, but it works on all smartphones and tablets, etc.
into the very bodies of people, their physical health, is the big question behind the discipline called social epidemiology.
I'll stop there. I can see the light is on. The episode continues on with this dual conversation between Harriet and her son Jack, and then it has a cliffhanging ending. I'll be glad to hear. I'm working on this with an incredibly talented web programmer called Andy Campbell, who I must mention, and this prototype is ready to go now. So that's it for me. So thank you. Is there any time? Yeah. Is it time for a couple of questions if anybody has any questions? There's one back there. Yeah, and this, you're asking about obsolescence, really, aren't you? What happens when formats change, when devices change with multimedia works of this kind? Yeah, is that what you're asking? Yeah, you know, that is not something I've thought about very much. For me, I just think about the story. I just think about telling the story with the available tools in the best way that I can. And maybe if I'm lucky, somebody else will think about archiving it. Anything else? Lunchtime.